Wave's future is aligned with low-footprint circular supply chains for the resources of the future. For over 21 years, we've been determining strategies, designing and engineering solutions, and delivering built assets for our clients. From a natural resource in the ground or a secondary byproduct to the advanced materials required to electrify our future, Wave's expertise is being engaged globally. Wave International, delivering commercially engineered projects for 21 years.
Okay, so here we are, kicking off one of the keynote interviews for the IMARC 2020 Critical Mineral session. Today we've got a really interesting session with key players from two of the most dynamic subsectors of the critical mineral space, being rare earths and lithium. Here with us to talk about all the fun and excitement that's going on is Gavin Lockyer, Managing Director of Arafura Resources, and Tim Goldsmith, CEO of Rincon Lithium. Arafura are developing the Nolans rare earth project here in Australia. So Gavin, why don't you take a moment and give us a quick intro to yourself, Arafura, and the Nolans project.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Wave, for sponsoring this session. Look, Arafura, as you said, is developing the Nolans Bore neodymium-praseodymium, or rare earth project in Central Australia. It's 135 k's north of Alice Springs. We've been developing this for quite some time. We've now got it to a point where we've completed the DFS. We've got all our environmental and regulatory approvals in place, and now looking for funding basically to supply these critical minerals into what is looming to be a growing and booming economy post-COVID.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Gavin. And joining Gavin, we've got Tim. Tim, perhaps you want to do the same thing. Let us know a little bit about yourself, Rincon, the Sailor del Rincon project, and yeah, a bit about your proposed direct extraction route.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks again to Wave for sponsoring this session. Rincon Lithium is a huge undeveloped lithium brine resource in Argentina, in Salta province in Argentina. It's probably the largest undeveloped lithium resource in the world. We've been the owners of it for 12 years. We are not listed. We're an unlisted company owned 100% by private equity. So we fund it all ourselves. We have been working this project for 12 years, and we are currently building a pilot plant on a new process which we're adopting, which we believe will make us the lowest cost lithium producer in the world. It's been a bit slow because of COVID, as everyone has, but we are very excited about where lithium and where the world is going now that we seem to be coming out of the challenging year that 2020 has been.
Yeah, well, 12 years. Well, you certainly did come in well ahead of the curve then, getting into lithium at that point in time, no doubt. So, look, many thanks, guys, for those introductions. And I think, look, what's going to be a little bit interesting here is that this session's about critical minerals, but whilst it's one name, I think we'll see some common challenges. But what I think is going to be interesting is to see some of the unique challenges, but not only challenges, opportunities between the subsectors. So, because each of them is it's a sector in its own right. So I guess kicking right into it, something that always is good to talk about is supply and demand, and it's widely misunderstood, and as it's an emerging sector. We might kick off a little bit on the rare earth sides. I'd have to say that in my experience, it is one of the most misunderstood sort of supply demand markets. So Gavin, do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you see end-use demand for rare earths, sort of the current situation, how it might have changed in the last year, and how it might change sort of in the near term. But maybe also a little bit about the differences between some of the rare earth elements, because rare earth certainly isn't just one thing. It's not one elemental compound, and I think that's pretty good for people to understand.
Look, as a finance accounting kind of guy, learning all about rare earths was an interesting thing, having come from both investment banking but then base and precious metals mining background. Suddenly all that chemistry that I thought I'd forgotten from year 10 suddenly came back to play. as you say, the rare earths are a string of elements that sit at the bottom of the periodic table. There's 15 to 17 of them, depending on which ones you include and don't include. But the critical ones that we're focused on and that Nolan's bore is enriched in is neodymium praseodymium, or NdPr. And why they are so critical is because they are basically the backbone of high performance, super strong magnets. And if you think of anything that's being miniaturized in this economy or in this world, it's typically being done with magnets. So you have an automobile, you no longer have hydraulics in a lot of your steering and other functionalities. You'll often have electric steering, electric brakes, electric windows, electric windscreen wipers. All of those will have a little micro motor in them, which are being driven by neodymium magnets, and that makes your car lighter and therefore more fuel efficient. But what the real growth industries going forward for the rare earths, and in particular the magnet feed, NdPr, is in renewables and also in e-mobility. So every electric motor has, in a motor vehicle, has about 1 kilogram of magnet in it, and about 1/3 of that is NdPr. So whilst Tim's project is in lithium and we're in rare earths, they are very complementary in this space, because the growing demand is coming out of e-mobility and storage of energy, and they're interlinked. And what makes a big cost of your automobile is the battery in an electric car, I mean. And if you want that battery to drive further for the same weight, then you need a rare earth magnet, and that's where we come into play. So we're sort of complementary, but also at the same time different. China has historically dominated the rare earth market in terms of supply, and we're looking to become really the second producer outside of China to feed into this market. And just quickly, COVID's changed the whole aspect here, because when a lot of the factories shut down in China earlier this year, a lot of the auto sector, who've been running very thin supply of or procurement supply chains, suddenly realized that they couldn't get materials. So they actually had to shut down auto plants in Europe well ahead of when the rest of Europe went into lockdown. And this has been highlighted by COVID. And so governments and around the world are now looking at critical minerals as a way, or sorry, at this sector, in terms of how can they diversify supply.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that, mate. There's obviously a lot there to take in. But look, that's actually probably a pretty good segue to throwing over to Tim, because you mentioned that a number of countries around the world are developing critical minerals lists, or governments are setting up critical minerals policies. And when you have a look at lithium's certainly been listed on just about every critical minerals list there is that's been developed. Yet you do hear from time to time people saying lithium's everywhere, and even from people such as everyone's favourite billionaire Elon. So I guess, Tim, would be interested to hear your views on what appears to be a bit of a contradiction, in that people are listing lithium as a critical mineral, but some people are saying it's everywhere. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that, mate?
Yeah, thanks. There's never a dull moment with Elon, is there? So I guess he's also talking his own book to some extent, obviously. I mean, at recent Battery Day, he certainly did come out and say lithium is everywhere, and we're about to turn lithium clay into fully battery grade with just salt water. So I think there's an awful lot of skepticism to what he says, primarily because people have tried to do what he's talked about for 30 or 40 years and no one succeeded. And it's certainly not simple. But I think the key to lithium is, yes, there's a lot of it everywhere, but you need it in economic quantities, and they aren't everywhere. The other piece about lithium is it is more a chemical than it is a mined product. The mining of the lithium is not the hard piece, whether you're a hard rock mine or a brine. The hard piece is the processing to take it from a small part lithium into a large part of lithium, or battery grade in particular, which is 99.5% lithium carbonate. And to sort of maybe drill down that a little bit further, historically, there haven't been many lithium mines if you go back 10, 20 years. And those which did exist, the brines out of South America and Chile in particular, still don't produce much battery grade lithium. So it isn't an easy game for anyone to play. So to get the process to get it through to battery grade is super challenging. And therefore, the demand which is coming from the electrical vehicles, which Gavin talked about, they need the battery grade. Whereas prior to the electrical vehicles, the lithium which was needed in the world, frankly, was, let's call it sort of technical grade or industrial lithium. There was more than enough to cope with that. But for battery grade, it's a different ballgame. And it is all about the process. And I guess just now going back to Elon Musk and what you said and the battery day, the one thing which he did say there was how many cars Tesla were planning to produce by 2030. And in everyone's forecasts of where lithium and these other critical minerals were going, we had some views of what 2030 might look like. And he blew them all out of the water by saying that he alone was going to produce more than we were seeing for the whole world's demand. And obviously, none of us think Tesla will be the only electrical vehicle maker. So there seems to be, and I think inherently we're all seeing it with just discussions through Europe and Asia, and I suspect America ever more so now you got Biden in the White House, this need for or demand for more electrical vehicles, and following that energy storage. And that's going to need lithium ion batteries. So we are very positive about the outlook for lithium for the demand side, and supply will be super, super challenging because we've been through a fairly strange journey the last few years. We went from boom to bust very, very quickly, but on very small quantities of demand. And because of that, the funding for projects has just been non-existent. And each passing day that funding remains tough to get makes it much harder for new projects like ours to get into play.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's look, I think that's a pretty good summary of where things are at there. And look, I certainly don't disagree with you. We obviously do a lot of work on the supply side, on the lithium chain, and also agree with you. We've been tasked with making battery grade lithium chemicals out of a number of different resources, and it's not always straightforward. And even if you do achieve it in the lab, to take that and build an economic process around it, which you could then commercialise, is a whole nother ball game again. So, I certainly concur with your sentiments there that it isn't that easy. You guys have been at it for a long time and look like you're having some success. And, it probably does go a long way to say that is the kind of effort that it does take to start to develop some of these technologies that are needed to bring this supply on. So it's certainly not come up with an idea and flick it through the lab and you're there. So, well, moving on from there, we talked a little bit about supply and demand, and I think, Gavin, you mentioned before a little bit about the changing environment we're in, sort of post-COVID and the way people are thinking about supply chains. I guess there's certainly a bit in the media for those who want to look for it about discussions between, Australia and the US, and the US's policy on rare earths in particular. They've been quite outspoken about that. So can you sort of give us some comments about how, maybe you viewed the supply chains, 12 months ago with China being a powerhouse, and how you might think it look in 12 months with what's going on in the US, but I suppose also the huge forecast emergence of an EV industry within Europe, and not only that, the very, very strong messages from the EU around 2050 carbon zero and all of the policies and the Green Deal that comes along with that.
Sure. And I think whilst we're talking EVs, we shouldn't dismiss the renewable sector either, because from both rare earth magnets that sit in those turbines to the lithium batteries for the storage of the power, that's going to be a massive growing demand too, in line with a lot of the EU and now Biden's, I guess, green policies. But in terms of how the market from our side has changed in the last 12 months, look, COVID, for all the terrible and horrific things it's done to people and families around the world, has actually highlighted in our sector, being quite blunt, something that's always been there. The world has been 95% reliant on China for its rare earth magnets, and still is to this point in time. Trump has tried to highlight this issue. He's had a number of discussions with our Prime Minister. There's been a number of delegations for critical minerals backwards and forwards between the US and Australia. I've been part of those delegations. There's been lots of talk out of the US, but the issue is that the US doesn't buy oxides. It buys end components. It buys components that go into drones or weaponry or whatever it might be. And so the US still doesn't fully understand its supply chain in this regard. So I'd have to say that they are a little bit behind the rest of the world. The EU is certainly mapped their supply chain and they understand the criticality of it. And I think that's a reflection, and let's take Germany, for example. I think it's something like 13% of the German population is employed in or around the auto sector. And as we see governments trying to keep their, recover from COVID, the auto sector has been seen as and the renewable sector has been seen as something that they are certainly going to focus on. So I would expect, and we're seeing this already, some of the automakers are now saying that, they're going to fully electric platforms instead of being 5 to 10 years out. They're now saying they're going to do this in 3 to 5 years. Now, how is that going to look in another year's time? Well, the story that we're trying to get across to all these potential customers of ours is, well, if you want that to achieve that growth in your sales and transform your businesses from ICEs into electric vehicles, you really need to start looking at supply now for your critical inputs, because we have a gestation period. We have, a 2.5 year construct and commissioning period. So if they want to meet a 3-year time frame without addressing their supply chain issues, they've got some serious problems coming. And I think Tim alluded to even the statements put out by Elon Musk and his aspirations for EVs. So this is the messaging we're trying to get across at the moment, that if you want to do something about this, you need to act now, because otherwise you'll be building all of these things in China, because there is no other supply. And just like Tim's project, rare earth projects have a long gestation period, where chemical processes, we're not just same as Tim, 15% of our capex and opex is in mining. It's not the cost that's not the cost that kills us. It's the chemistry set that sits at the back end, and you've got to make chemical grade, otherwise it won't meet spec and it won't be fit for purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And just with a little bit of time we got left, I want to flick back to Tim on that top. So again, another good segue from you there, Gavin, is you mentioned a little bit before, Tim, about lithium being more of a chemical, the quality aspects, and obviously there's a bit of work going on with fast markets and the LME at the moment, and pushing a bit of a barrow there, which has certainly got the industry a little bit divided, I have to say. Some comments from you, I guess, on how you see that maybe playing out, but also, I guess, the role you think technology is going to play in achieving that battery grade at the moment. If you think, that in order to meet demand, how much do you think we're going to be relying on new tech to be able to bring new resources into the market at the right grade?
Yeah, so and this goes directly to, I guess lithium is currently coming from two sources, which are brines and hard rock. So whilst there's a couple of clays projects out there, they haven't actually made it through. You look at the brines I mentioned before, the ones which have been operating, there's 3 mines that have been operating for 25, 30 years. They struggle to make battery grade. The newer mine of them all, the Orocobre one, again, struggles to make battery grade as well. They all use conventional systems which use evaporation ponds. So there's a real drive to use a direct extraction method for a number of reasons. Environmentally, it's very sound. Frankly, for our project, it's around the fact that our grade is not as high as those other projects, and the direct extraction reduces our cost, which is why we are doing it. But the aim of it is to make a more consistent product which can get you there. So that is certainly the technology piece at play. When you look at the hard rock mines, and Australia is the main place where they're coming from, again, most of the conversion occurs in China. So go back to Gavin's point from before, your supply chains, if you're a little bit worried about China and its role in the world and where it might head, then it's a pretty challenging outlook that the conversion all happens in China. Now, there's a few hydroxide plants trying to be built in Australia, and obviously in varying degrees of completeness of where they are. And I absolutely understand why the owners of those would want to do that to avoid that China piece. So I think it's going to be very interesting how this all does play out, particularly as Europe becomes a much bigger buyer of electrical vehicles than China. I think this year, for the first year, that will be the case. And I can't see why that would change, frankly. So it's fascinating to me that the Americans and the Europeans have let China really own so much of the space for so long and are really coming from behind, which is why they need us all on their critical lists and they need to be helping us, frankly, because funding is the issue for us, frankly. There's lots of good projects out there, but they can't get the funding which is needed to make them into operating plants, particularly when you look at these things, as we said to you already, the chemistry sets. Chemistry sets aren't going to work on day one exactly as you like. There's going to need to be some patience. So there's going to need to be some patient shareholders. And it's been a tough journey, I can assure you.
Absolutely, and we certainly live that every day as engineers and managers trying to bring these projects through studies and through finance and into construction and operations. So, look, I think we're out of time. That absolutely flew by, and I guess we've really only touched the tip of the iceberg on this topic. But look, thanks Tim, thanks Gavin. I think those were really good points that you were able to sort of talk to in the time that we had. And yeah, I'm sure that if anyone as a delegate here at IMARC has got any questions, I'm sure they can reach out to you through the IMARC platform. So we'll leave it at that. And thanks again, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ryan.